Today, I'm in the Netherlands to explore the rich pagan history that exists all the way back to the time before the Romans. And even into the modern era, pagan practices seem to exist within small moments throughout everyone's lives. To start us off, I am here in the southern Netherlands near Eindhoven, in a forest that really doesn't have any unique name. In fact, we parked on the side of a road near a farmer's land to come into this magical location. It is actually quite hard to describe the beauty and the presence of such a location, and oftentimes the videos that I'm going to create are not going to be able to do these amazing sights justice, simply because it's a feeling that you'll have when you look at these mounds for the first time, especially as the sun is rising over the frost-covered hills, as it is February when I'm recording this. The morning is cold, there's birds chirping, the moss is a vibrant green, the sun is warm and melting the frost, and it is just such a presence. What I would like to talk about here with you is the ancient history of religion in the Netherlands, in particular, the religion before the Romans. Now, this is a hard subject to talk about because there is only artifacts and things such as burial mounds that can give us any information about this time, because typically the Romans were the first people group to write things down, or at least in a way that was preserved into our modern era, and so we really don't know that much about the people that existed before the Romans started writing about them. But before we move too deeply into that subject matter, I do need to mention that when I say the Netherlands, I'm also talking about northern Germania, or at least the northern part of Central Europe, because the Netherlands as a concept is fairly new. The people groups that existed here have been around for much longer. An example of this is the people group known as the Frisians, which are a group you may have known about, which existed in the northern Netherlands, and it's still a part of the provinces of the Netherlands today, is known as Frisia, and there's a capital of this province as well. So this people group still exists, but the ancient tribe that existed here was known to the Romans as well. There are actually many people groups that existed here during the time of the Romans, including the Angles, the Saxons, the Gauls, the Germani, the Frisians, the Tungri, and even the Franks to some extent, and of course people groups that I don't know and couldn't find, and other people groups that have been lost to time. But again, this is what we knew during the Roman era. So what about before the Romans? Well, this is something we really just honestly don't know, and a lot of the names we have were given to these people groups according to scholars and historians today as we do research on them. The most notable group of people are the funnel beaker culture, which existed along the riverlands to the east of modern-day Netherlands. And this people group started making villages, and which is one of the reasons we know about them is because we have found evidence of these villages still existing today, including their pottery work, which is where they get their name. Now, when it comes to the Ice Age, the time before the funnel beaker culture, this is when things get very complicated because we know even less. During the Ice Age and the Stone Age and coming into the Bronze Age, very little evidence is left behind of what the people would have done, especially religiously. The only thing that I could find, and the only research I could find, was mostly on the tribal cultures that existed and the totems they would have carried around with them. Personal totems seem to be a thing that have been found in this area that give us some clue to some religious practice, but we do not know the name of the gods they would have followed. We do not know really any details about the religious practices that existed. So if my Dutch translator is correct here on this sign here at these burial mounds, these are very interesting, and I actually really love this diagram. So the actual ceremony of the creation of these burial mounds is kind of known to us, or at the very least has a very good theory. So at the center of the burial mounds was a fire that they would cremate the body in before the burial mound was built, and then they would have sticks in the center of it as well, and then on the outer edge they would have stones laid out, and then after the body was burned, then they created the burial mound. And so what we can kind of see here is an actual ceremony, which would have been religious, notably because it's dealing with death. And so each of these, I believe, from what we can tell, had a ceremony attached to it. So to me, that makes these spots very interesting, because a lot of burial mounds I've been to don't have this level of detail onto the actual practice of the creation of them. So very fascinating spot so far, and definitely has a very ominous presence to it.
Hi, my name is Claire. I'm the fellowship leader of the Netherlands from the Fellowship of Northern Traditions. Born and raised here, still live here in the lovely Netherlands. I've been pagan for I kind of want to say all my life I had a very pagan-like upbringing, very much in touch with the spirits and nature and everything, like the small practices around it. I've been putting on gatherings here, and also together with Jacob exploring a lot of like new things about Germanic paganism as well, things that feel familiar but also are kind of new, and kind of exploring the history of it. Experiencing burial mounds here in the Netherlands, like in my own country, I've never been to. Really, I've never seen these. It's very powerful to be here. It's definitely, I didn't know they were here, at least not that many, because most of the time people are more talking about the north with dolmens and hunnebedden, they're called. But these kind of burial mounds are here too, and it's just. It's amazing that they're here. It's amazing to see that they're well taken care of, and the energy is just so. I wouldn't say, yeah, kind of welcoming. It's kind of familiar at one point, on one side, but it's also very nice to see that still preserved, still being taken care of. People still come here to enjoy the history of it, learn from it. Yeah, it's really beautiful. It's beautiful to see.
When choosing a location to show you for this video, I had to choose between the burial mounds here in the south and the Hunebedden in the northeast part of the country. So I still want to talk about the Hunebedden because I think they are very interesting as well. The closest one to where I am staying was about 3 hours to 4 hours away. So I was not able to get my own footage, so I'll put up some pictures for you here so that you can see them. But they are essentially chambered cairns, chambered burial mounds that no longer are covered by earth. Now, they were actually covered by a type of clay that is unique to this region, and they were made by the funnel beaker culture that, as I had already mentioned. Now, the thing that I think makes these very interesting is the size of them and the variety of them. There are several of these Hunebedden in northeast Netherlands, and you can actually even find them across Denmark and Norway, and even into the British Isles with Scotland and England and Ireland. So this type and style are very, common across Central and Northern Europe and even into the islands, which begs another question of how connected these people groups were at the time of their creation. For the most part, we know they were nomadic people that had very limited contact with the other parts of the world, but I do think it's very important to note that in Celtic culture, or at least what we call Celtic, the Druids were a very communicative group, even though they only communicated orally, but they spread all across Central and into Northern Europe and had a network that communicated with one another and shared ideas. And so we really don't know the connection of why exactly the Hunebedden are so very similar to the other dolmen, I believe they're called, across Europe, and exactly where that connection exists. But regardless, I do think it's truly incredible to see them existing here in the Netherlands when so many people would never even know they existed in the first place. Around the same time of the funnel beaker culture was also the Swifterbont culture. So interestingly enough, this village behind me here is a recreation village of that culture and their style of building. So not too far from this location here in the Netherlands, the village was actually found. Now the actual people group is not known who built these things. However, the name of Swifterbont culture seems to be the round term here, because this is called the Swifterkamp, the recreation village around this. And so this village is really unique and has a lot of interesting pieces, including a museum. It has a longhouse that you can stay in, and then it has a camping area, it has a fire pit area, a living room as they call it. So there's a lot of really fun things here. Luckily enough, I am here with the Fellowship of Northern Traditions, a community of people that are trying to resurrect the old Northern traditions of Europe. We're here renting this for the weekend, performing some rituals, and then also just kind of living the ways of the ancestors that may have lived like this. And I think that's really the important part here. The important part of pagan religions today is remembering what the ancestors went through and how hard their lives were, because our lives now are so much easier, at least in the sense of getting food, of staying warm, of surviving. And so when we actually cast aside the modern conveniences, or at least 90% of the modern conveniences, and live like this for a weekend, we can remember what it was like to live back then. And by doing so, we'll also understand a little bit more of the religious practices of the past, as their way of looking at the world is going to be drastically different than ours. And I think that's something I really noticed the first night here, as we all went to bed in the massive long house and had to sleep in the same room together. And in the past, this would have been done additionally as to having the farm animals in the house as well for the body heat. So you can imagine how smelly that would be. But luckily, we did not have to do that. It did get quite cold. We all had our sleeping bags in there, and not many of us got a lot of sleep. Except for me, I actually slept like a baby, because honestly, this place is truly incredible. I think my favorite part of the weekend so far, staying in this primitive village, has actually been cooking here in this little primitive kitchen. It's something we had to do the moment we got here. And I think what was so amazing about it is the way it makes you feel connected to the ancestors once again. Having to cook similar way to they would have had to cook. You would actually have a fire going, maintain the fire, deal with the smoke, deal with one cooking temperature. That wasn't necessarily easy. And so while I was really tired of getting smoke in my eyes throughout the cooking process, I just really enjoyed it, just throughout the whole thing. And then being able to serve everyone this big vat of soup at the very end was just truly incredible. And then even like the process of cleaning up is just different, because it takes more time. And you're more cautious. You're not using 8 different skillets and 4 different knives. Like, you're using one pot, because, you know, it's a lot of work. And then sure enough, first thing this morning, you know, you want to cook and you have to start a fire. It's the first thing you have to do. And so if we wanted our breakfast, someone had to get up early and get the fire going and then prepare for breakfast. And it was just, it really makes you feel like you're living in a village. Again, it's not going to be 100% accurate. And the experience that we're having here is obviously not 100% historic. We still have toilets. But other than that, it's just been a really amazing way to connect with the ancestors, and specifically the ancestors that lived here. Wanted to take a brief break here and say, if you're enjoying this video, please make sure you like and subscribe and all that good YouTuber stuff. And furthermore, if you really appreciate the content here, please think about supporting me on Patreon. This video has been a lot of work to make, has been filmed over several days in several different locations with several days of research, and then I'm sure several days of editing on top, with plenty of just film collection, recordings, voiceovers, and everything else that goes into this. This is a one-man band. It's just me behind the scenes doing all of this. And so if you want to support the work I'm doing here across Europe, recording these ancient sites and information about ancient European religions, please think about supporting me down below on Patreon. There's several tiers, and I also have recently written a book about Yule celebrations in the modern era, so please think about checking out that book as well and supporting me through Amazon. So right behind me here is a god totem that is named Org, I believe, according to the website here. And what this really draws attention to is that we don't know that much about the tribal religious practices of the past before the Roman writings. And so god totems like this have been found across Northern Europe, and they are very similar to this in design, so they did a really good job trying to recreate these. And these are actually fairly common. I've seen them all across Northern Europe, including in Edinburgh and Scotland. But we don't know anything about these god totems. When they are found, it's not like they have a name below them. There's no names carved into them. More than likely, everyone was illiterate. They had no writing system. And so they're kind of lost to history of what the deities that were venerated in this village or during this time would have been like. So what we're left with is the faint memory of deity veneration of the past. However, it's still really cool to see. I mean, we have an altar plate right below the god totem here. So, the idea of giving offerings to a deity. It also reminds me of the Roman writings as well. As they explored into Germania, they described the grim faces of deities in sacred groves. And looking at this and this recreation, I can see why the Romans would be so appalled by it or so disturbed by it, because they had these statues of the gods, the statues of the goddesses that were so beautiful, and then you actually see a Germanic deity from this time, and they're very rough and wooded and part of the natural world. And so as we transition into the conversation about the deities that were venerated during the Roman era here in northern Germania, we're definitely going to be talking about beautiful goddesses because they were Romanized and made into Roman placards as the Romans came up through this way. But a true Germanic representation of their deities was more close to this god totem org behind me. We don't know much about the religious practices of the pagans that lived in northern Germania, of course, until the time of the Romans, as they were the first people to write stuff down. Now, sadly, this information can only be slightly trusted, as their goal and intention on writing things down, oftentimes when it was about the Germanic tribes, was not to shed them in a good light. And so the practices that were shared were mostly, barbaric in their eyes, and how they didn't approve of the religious practices of the people of Germania, and particularly northern Germania. Now, what makes this region so interesting to me and why I really want to make a video on it is since the location is so centralized to Europe, really, in the sense of the Germanic people, the Gallic people, the Celts, and the Nordic, the beliefs here are an interesting mix of all of these pagan practices. And so there's references to Germanic gods such as Woden, even Saxon deities such as Saxnot or Saxon, and then there's even the deities of the Nordic gods worshipped here as well, and then there are the Celtic gods, and then their own deities venerated here. And so there's a very interesting mix of deities worshipped in northern Germania or the modern day Netherlands. What was also interesting to me is that when Romans came into this area, they were also creating votive offerings and shrines to the gods and goddesses that were venerated here. And so the most prominent of these is Nehelenia, which has over 200 votive shrines made in Roman style, but is a goddess of the Netherlands, is a goddess of this region. And so the Romans, or at least Roman artisans, were making these shrines devoted to this goddess of this region. And this was true of several other deities as well. So you have Soundradiga, which has very little information on her, besides the fact that her name translates to she who dyes the sand red. And she's had a couple of votive shrines dedicated to her that were found in this area. You also have Huludana, which was worshipped in Frisia. She was possibly tied to the sea, as she was venerated by fishermen who would build shrines to her. You have Vagda Varkudis, whom was venerated near modern-day Cologne, which is part of northern Germany now, but still very close to this region. And all that we really know about her is that she could possibly be tied to trees, as trees were featured on her votive shrine that has been found. You also have Viridectus, who was worshipped by the Tungri people that lived in modern-day Belgium as well as the Netherlands, and have actually migrated to Scotland as well, where another votive shrine was found to Viridectus. And then you have writings about deities made by the Romans, the first one being Tacitus writing about the Frisian goddess beten. Soon afterwards, it was ascertained from deserters that 900 Romans had been cut to pieces in a wood called beten, after prolonging the fight to the next day, and that another body of 400, which had been taken possession of the house of one of Cructorix. And then I was also able to find information that a goddess called Tamfana was worshipped by the Marsi people or the Marsai people in Germany as well. And that is a lot of the information that we have about these goddesses. There's so very little information about them, Nehelenia probably being the most that I was able to find from this region. But I do want to make a note that it is very interesting that all the deities that I could find information on of this specific region of Europe were goddesses. And I could find no specific information on any gods that were venerated here. Now, I'm sure there were gods that were venerated in this region, but it seems like the Romans took a particular interest in the goddesses. And so what I'm actually going to do over here at this gathering is perform a ritual for these unknown goddesses of this region to just draw attention to them. I'm going to give an offering, call others to give an offering, to speak their name aloud in the same area that they would have been venerated in, or very close to it, in a village that may have been very similar to to a place they were venerated in. And so that's really what I like to do with this channel, with my personal practice, is explore these small little subject matters that have been forgotten largely in the world to share with all of you. I called the goddesses
of an ancient world. Goddesses of water, of war, of life, of death, mothers, grandmothers, sisters, daughters. This land honored the goddesses of the past. Goddesses such as Nahalinia, goddess of apples, of sailing, dogs, of family. Goddesses we barely know the names of: Huna, Veredictus, Kamfana. Goddesses with names of glory, like Sandraldiga, the goddess spills red on the sand. We stand here remembering them. We stand here remembering their names and the times they came from. If you have any offerings to give, or would like to give an apple to these goddesses of the ancient world, please do so now. This is a beautiful location, and I can often find in life it is so easy to lose track of all the things we do. But I really hope this weekend, these buildings, this lake, the goddesses, all these things stay with you. Thank you for joining me for this ritual, and let's have one last Hail the Goddesses. Hail the Goddesses!
I think Christianity is still like one of the first religions that comes to mind if you think about the Netherlands. However, paganism always has been kind of alive here, but it's more found in the subtle things. We love connecting to nature. We like going out to nature. We're very proud of our history, especially the ones like before Christ, like how it's preserved here. It's well taken care of. We still have the recreational villages, and everybody is very open to talk about that history. It's not very much frowned upon if you're practicing nature like religions, if you even want to call it a religion. In that regard here, it's found in the subtle things, just like seeing at the tree, people are like putting a small things, small offerings, and stuff like that, and everybody kind of does it. So it's still very much integrated in who we are here in the Netherlands, but also in Germania, and I bet also in Scandinavia.
When looking at how paganism survives today within the Netherlands, I can think of no better example than the Efteling. Opened first in 1952, it is an amusement park similar to that of Disneyland, but with a Germanic twist. The rides and attractions are all based on fairy tales, mainly inspired from the works of the Grimm brothers and Hans Christian Andersen. I think it's always important to remember and to bring up that when researching folklore and folk tales, that many of the stories do have pagan origins, do have pre-Christian religious origins within the tales. However, many of them have been developed over the last few hundred years and may have started within the Christian era of the Netherlands or Germany or wherever they come from. Now, having said that, there are still many stories that we look at that do actually have pagan origins there, especially in things such as the Troll King here, who shares prophecies based on your astrological signs. Like, obviously, there are many modern things in this as well, but it's still really cool to see the idea of a Troll King giving prophecy to the children that come here and the adults. And I think the children are really the thing I want to focus on, because really folk tales, from my experience and my research, are ways to teach children how to stay safe and how to stay alive, because we all know when we are children that we feel invincible, we can do everything and not get hurt. But it's important to wrap these lessons in a story that children can understand. And I think that's what I really loved watching here, is all the children going up to these displays and learning about the various tales and stories and the lessons they may share here, stories of failure, of triumph, of love, of curses, and some honestly scary things as well. And I think these are all things that are embedded in our young minds, and these things come from a very ancient past, and sometimes that past is pagan. But ultimately, folklores and folk tales are a very human thing, and it's really cool to see them here at the Efteling in such a modern way, but also in such an old way. So highly recommend, if you're ever in the Netherlands, please check out the Efteling amusement park. I do not think you'll be disappointed, and may be very surprised at what you find that definitely scratches that itch for possible connections to the ancient pagan past. The history of religion after the fall of Rome within the Netherlands and northern Germania is very common to what happened with majority of Europe. Between the 5th and the 11th century, the time of conversion happened when majority of the pagan population converted over to Christianity or went into hiding. From my research, it appears that most people moved to the Christian belief system around the 11th century here in the Netherlands and within northern Germany. And with that, it was pretty normal throughout most of history moving into the modern era. And around the 20th century, people really began to question religion, especially after World War II, which is when Christianity began to see the biggest decline here, especially in the Netherlands. In most recent news in 2020, over 60% of the population here in the Netherlands does not declare any religion whatsoever. And I know to my viewers back in North America, this is actually quite shocking considering the fact that around 60% of North America considers themselves Christian or monotheistic or some form of Christianity. In fact, I think those numbers are even higher than that the last time I checked. So this was actually a pretty big shock for me coming from North America, coming over here to Europe and learning that religion is on the decline. Now, having said that, pagan religions are actually on the rise. In many Northern European countries, including the Netherlands and Germany, even up all the way to Estonia, many countries are actually returning to pagan practices. Now, it's not to the scores of, tens of thousands of people returning to it and it's becoming a very large movement, but there is actually an increase in these belief systems. Now, what is difficult a lot of the times is these religions do not attract such numbers or such congregations that they are counted within the census, and I could find no census data on how many Dutch people actually followed some form of pagan or New Age religion. Some final notes on this I'll actually bring up is I have noticed there are a lot more books written about pagan practices and pagan history here in the Netherlands, and a lot of them are in Dutch, and so they are not translated into English. In fact, I think there are many more books written here about this subject material, and we just simply don't have that information in English, and it's definitely not made it across to North America, to the people practicing back in the States. And that's because they aren't, the Scandinavian fjords. They're not, Germany. They're not Scotland and the Highlands. And so I think they often get forgotten about. But as I've shown you in this video, they had many deities that they venerated. They had stone monuments and burial mounds. They had unique practices and a very unique history and outlook. And even now, they have a very interesting revival of these religions today. So I truly believe that the Netherlands is a place that we should look at more when it comes to the revival of pagan religions. And that's why I made this video. So I really hope you've enjoyed this video and enjoyed this look at a religious practice of paganism that I do not believe is studied enough. So the next time you think about the Netherlands, maybe don't think about Amsterdam and the red light district, but instead think about the unique pagan practices that existed here in the past, but also still exist here today. My name is Jacob Todson, this is the Wisdom of Odin, and thank you for joining me for this video on the rich pagan history of the Netherlands.